It was the meeting the world was waiting for. U.S. President Donald Trump and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin seemed to hit it off at their first bilateral meeting on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Hamburg. The talks lasted more than 2 hours, while surpassing the 35 minutes the two sides had originally set aside. U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, who was the only other American official in the closed-door meeting, said neither Trump nor Putin wanted to stop and that they had a lot to talk about.
It's an honor to be with you.
The president reaching out to shake the hand of the man accused of meddling in America's election.
I'm delighted to be able to meet you personally, Mr. President.
In their first face-to-face, it was President Trump who made the first move. The cameras capturing the smiling and the small talk, even a back pat. Then it was down to business.
We're going to have a talk now, and obviously that will continue, but we look forward to a lot of very positive things happening for Russia, for the United States.
Well, Russia and the US have reached a ceasefire agreement over the conflict in Syria. The pause will come into effect Sunday at noon Damascus time. Reports the agreement includes security, military and political details related to the sharing of power and border security, and is based on keeping Syrian President Bashar al-Assad in power, as well as keeping Iran away from the border areas.
Now, ceasefires in Syria have not had the best of track records. Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen looks at the latest effort to end the deadly civil war.
Thank you. Of all that hangs on the handshake between Presidents Trump and Putin, nothing is more consequential than the Syrian civil war, now in its 7th year with more than 400,000 lives lost. Shored up by Russian airstrikes and Iranian-backed militias, the regime of Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad has driven U.S.-backed rebels from much of the territory they once controlled, while a U.S.-led coalition force has gutted the self-proclaimed caliphate of the terror group ISIS. Jabhat Fatah al-Sham, the al-Qaeda offshoot formerly known as al-Nusra, remains a potent force.
International terrorism is the #1 enemy, and it is imperative to put everything aside to fight against it.
Yet virtually entire cities have been obliterated. 5 million Syrians have fled to neighboring countries, and more than 6 million still in the country have been forced from their homes. In Europe this week, President Trump called on the Kremlin to jettison Assad.
We urge Russia to cease its destabilizing activities and its support for hostile regimes, including Syria and Iran, and to instead join the community of responsible nations.
The State Department said the U.S. is open with Russian assistance to creating no-fly zones in Syria, part of a preview of the Trump-Putin dialogue offered Thursday by spokesperson Heather Nauert.
We believe that Russia has a special responsibility. They have unique leverage over the Syrian regime, and so we're going to continue to put pressure on them and ask them to do more.
Secretary of State Tillerson hailed the two presidents' agreement on a ceasefire zone in southwest Syria as the first indication that Washington and the Kremlin can work together in theater. But experts said they had seen this movie before.
Margaret, ceasefires in Syria have been announced before. How is this one different?
Well, Tillerson says this time Russia has the incentive to make it work because the defeat of ISIS is imminent and the U.S. military role will likely come to an end. Of course, these paper agreements only work if the fighters on the ground comply. And now we'll have to see if the U.S. and Russia can control them.
The North Korean nuclear threat has been hanging over this summit. Did the president make any headway there?
Not with Russia, and there was an open concession that progress with China so far has been no better than mixed. Secretary of State Tillerson said neither country view the North Korean threat with the same level of urgency as the U.S., forcing the administration to adopt what it calls a campaign of peaceful pressure, one Tillerson conceded will require some degree of patience.
U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has criticized China for not taking enough action to end North Korea's ongoing nuclear crisis. Speaking at the G20 summit ahead of President Trump's scheduled meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping on Saturday, Tillerson said Chinese efforts to convince North Korea to abandon its nuclear and missile programs had been uneven. He added Beijing's promise to stick more economic pressure on Pyongyang after the two countries' bilateral summit in April did not meet Washington's expectations. However, Tillerson stressed that the Trump administration will continue to work with China, but warned that diplomatic options are running out.
Two U.S. officials told Reuters on Friday the United States plans to carry out a new test of its THAAD missile defense system against an intermediate-range ballistic missile in the coming days. The announcement comes as tensions with North Korea continue to climb. Despite being planned months ago, the U.S. missile defense test will gain significance in the wake of North Korea's launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile on July 4th. That launch has heightened concerns about the threat from Pyongyang. One of the officials said the test will be the first of the terminal high-altitude area defense to defend against a simulated attack by an intermediate-range ballistic missile.
In a show of military might, the United States flew two powerful nuclear-capable B-1B bombers over South Korea on Saturday, in a show of strength to North Korea following its recent long-range missile launch. It's the first time the Allies have openly conducted such a drill.
Two U.S. B-1B bombers flew to South Korea on Saturday for a joint drill that lasted 10 hours. The long-range bombers that flew in from Guam early Saturday morning were joined by South Korea-based F-15K and F-16 fighter jets upon reaching the Korean peninsula. The drill was carried out in the eastern province of Gangwon-do, where the B-1Bs practiced their attack capabilities by dropping inert weapons to destroy a mock-up missile launcher, while the other fighter jets pounded underground facilities. Before heading back to Guam, the bombers flew northward near the military demarcation line in a clear show of force to North Korea. It marks the first time for the U.S. long-range strategic bombers to openly exercise in skies over the Korean peninsula. Military authorities say the deployment serves as a warning to North Korea following its recent long-range missile launch, a missile that's speculated to be an ICBM. They also stressed the exercise is to show that regardless of where, how, and in what form Pyongyang provokes the Allies, the air forces of South Korea and the U.S. will respond right away and annihilate any further attempts to provoke.
State news agency Xinhua said Chinese President Xi Jinping urged Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe on Saturday to put aside distractions that have strained bilateral ties and warned that China was unwilling to compromise on Taiwan. Relations have been complicated for decades by the legacy of Japan's wartime aggression. Self-ruled Taiwan, which is claimed by China, was governed by Japan from 1895 to 1945 in another sensitive issue, and a maritime territorial dispute over small islands in the East China Sea has deepened mutual suspicion in recent years. Beijing complained to Tokyo in March after a Japanese minister visited Taiwan. China has also told Japan not to get involved in the dispute over the South China Sea.
Trump says he still wants Mexico to pay for a planned border wall between the two countries. It comes after the U.S. president met his Mexican counterpart, Enrique Peña Nieto, over trade issues, specifically the North American Free Trade Agreement. The Mexican president said the meeting would help the two leaders continue a very strong dialogue on the FTA. The Mexican government said Peña Nieto and Trump also agreed to address the issue of transnational organized crime in a shared and responsible manner, using a comprehensive strategy on both sides of the border.
The G20 in Hamburg enters the final day of a very difficult summit, according to host, German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Officials are looking to reach deals on trade and climate. The main stumbling block is the decision of US President Donald Trump to pull out of the Paris Climate Agreement last month. Trump also rejects free trade. Though he supports trade, he wants any deal to benefit and protect United States industry. Merkel says she expects the other 19 countries involved to stick to their commitments despite US opposition.
The United Nations has adopted a historic treaty aimed at ridding the world of nuclear weapons, but none of the world's nuclear-armed nations participated in the talks. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons was finalized after months of talks by negotiators from 129 member nations. The 10-page treaty prohibits a full range of nuclear weapons-related activities, such as undertaking to develop, test, produce, manufacture, acquire, possess, or stockpile nuclear weapons. However, a number of countries, including the US, Russia, and North Korea, were not involved. The treaty is set to be signed in September and enter into force 90 days after it has been ratified by at least 50 countries.
The city of Hebron in the West Bank is now a United Nations World Heritage Site, and Israel pulled $1 million in funding from the UN in response. UNESCO, the UN's Cultural Committee, designated the city as a heritage site in danger. The vote passed 12-3 by secret ballot with 6 abstentions. The trouble is, UNESCO declared the city a Palestinian heritage site. Over 200,000 Palestinians live in the city, but so do hundreds of Jewish settlers who claim it's Israeli land. Israel said UNESCO is ignoring its mission to foster cultural cooperation by overlooking the city's significance to Judaism. The decision covers a site known both as the Tomb of the Patriarchs and the Ibrahimi Mosque. It's a key holy site in both Judaism and Islam. Jews and Muslims currently share the holy site, but anyone who visits it has to pass through Israeli checkpoints. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called the move, quote, another delusional UNESCO decision. He said Israel's pulled UN funding would go to establishing a Jewish heritage museum instead.
Iraqi state television is reporting that ISIL will be defeated in Mosul in a matter of hours, saying the Iraqi army is just meters away from what it called the final victory. For 8 months, a US-led international coalition has been providing air and ground support to the army. Iraqi commanders say the insurgents are fighting for each meter with snipers, grenades and suicide bombers. Islamic State's dominion in Iraq will then be reduced to mainly rural desert areas west and south of Mosul, but they're expected to keep up attacks on selected targets across Iraq. Thousands of people have been killed and around 900,000 people, about half the city's pre-war population, have been displaced according to aid organizations.
The high Sierras of western Guerrero State have been known since the time of the Aztec Empire for their gold mines. But today, they're also known for spilled blood and cartel conflict. Southern Mexico's mountainous terrain presents significant policing challenges, and narco-traffickers here have long been in charge and ruthless. But people tired of life under narco rule have created a vigilante force that has risen up against the reign of terror. In 8 towns, they've dusted off their grandfathers' shotguns and taken on the defense of their communities.
Even the most remote communities were being extorted, and people were kidnapped and disappeared in an instant. We had enough of living in fear and decided to act. Since then, we have controlled who enters and leaves, and handed over those who we know are involved with organized crime to the state.
The Sierra's so-called community police works in 24-hour shifts, posting 12 armed men on patrols and checkpoints before a changing of the guard sees them return to their day jobs in the mines. The vigilantes are acting without state recognition, and although officials refuse to comment, local residents told TRT World the uprising has put an end to the daily violence.
There's a lot of tension because we know the narcos can come and attack at any time, but our men are keeping watch day and night, and there has been no more violence. It's the only way to fight organized crime, because the cops do nothing.
The tense standoff, a hostage situation near Atlanta, employees trapped for a time, the suspect calling our ABC station WSB with demands, and you will hear him before SWAT teams then moved in.
This was the terrifying scene at a Wells Fargo bank in the suburbs north of Atlanta. Inside, a man claiming he had an explosive in his backpack was holding hostages. Outside, a small army had their guns aimed at the bank.
Male subject went into the bank and advised that he had a quantity of explosives on his person.
We're learning tonight the suspect had a history of mental health issues and called our partners at Atlanta station WSB-TV with a list of demands. He told them he was Brian Easley and was a former Marine who served 2 tours in Iraq, that he was about to become homeless and had a disagreement with his local VA.
But I'm going to be out on the street, and I'm going to have nothing. I'm not going to have any money for food or anything. I'm just going to be homeless, and I'm going to starve.
A bank employee who was being held hostage also was on the phone.
Is there anything else that you can tell us about him?
No, he's very kind. He's been very respectful.
About 3 hours later, the bank employees inside ran outside. The SWAT team ran in, and the man was shot and killed.
Court documents showed on Friday a U.S. judge rejected efforts by 3 University of Texas professors to ban students from bringing guns to their classrooms after the state granted them that right last year. Professors Jennifer Glass, Lisa Moore, and Mia Carter had argued in a federal district court in Austin that academic freedom in classroom debate could be chilled under the so-called campus carry law backed by the state's Republican political leaders. The law allows concealed handgun license holders aged 21 and older to bring handguns into classrooms and other university facilities, including the University of Texas system, one of the nation's largest with more than 221,000 students. University of Texas professors had lobbied unsuccessfully to prevent the law, arguing the combination of youth, firearms, and college life could make for a deadly situation. Republican lawmakers said campus carry could help prevent a mass shooting.
Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny has been freed following a 25-day prison stint for violating the law on organizing public meetings. The Kremlin critic arranged 2 big gatherings in the last few months. Speaking upon his release, he said, "I'm very glad to be back in the office. We will, of course, not bend under any pressure and will soon convince everyone of that." Navalny is planning a long-shot presidential bid in next year's election. But the Central Election Commission says an embezzlement conviction means he's not eligible to run. The activist claims the case against him was politically motivated. His election headquarters were raided by investigators on Thursday.
CNN reports that an American tourist was beaten to death by a group of 10 men while visiting a Greek island in the Mediterranean. 22-year-old Bakari Henderson was at a bar in the Greek island of Zakynthos with his friends Friday when a man approached him and they began fighting. The fight escalated into a brawl in the streets after the bar's security asked the men to leave. 2 people, a 32-year-old Serbian and a 34-year-old Greek national, have been arrested. Police are searching for others who may be involved. Zakynthos, an island on the west coast of mainland Greece, is popular among tourists for its cliffside beaches and sea caves.
Next, then, a surge in migrants trying to get into Europe in recent months has led the EU's Migration Commissioner to admit the situation's getting worse. First off, Italy's already seen at least 85,000 migrants reach its shores so far this year, 2017. The countries pleaded with fellow EU nations to share the burden, but that, even up to this week, has been largely ignored. Then there's France, that giant makeshift camp housing migrants in Paris that had to be cleared by authorities, with the migrants put into temporary accommodation across the city, and also up to the north in Calais, the former site of the notorious jungle camp. That's now seen budget hotels fill their rooms with refugees for somewhere to go. Greece, that's also taken on a huge share of migrants. Locals on the island of Chios are furious their hotels are having to be used as emergency housing.
This whole migrant story is based on hypocrisy. Where are these migrants coming from? They're coming from Afghanistan. They're coming from Iraq. They're coming from Syria. They're coming from Libya. These are the countries where the US and NATO said they were going to bring democracy. So you bring democracy, and 20 years later you get migrants coming in droves. So the responsibility of the West comes in the fact that they have destabilized countries and they have attacked some of the most secular countries in the Mideast. The second hypocrisy, as you said, is that they've all got these nice words and very sweet to open the borders to refugees, so they're inviting them. When Mrs. Merkel said that she was going to greet these refugees, that was an invitation. But there's an invitation, and then when the migrants arrive, well, there's nobody to greet them.
And in Paris, dozens of religious leaders are embarking on a European tour that will visit sites of recent Islamist attacks. The trip is aiming to condemn the violence while remembering victims. Imams from several European countries were joined by other religious leaders on the Champs-Élysées, near where French policeman Xavier Jugot was killed in April. Leaders of the initiative say the tour is meant to send a message to both Muslim and non-Muslim communities that we must say no to hate and terror. The pilgrimage will stop in Brussels, Nice, and Berlin, where organizers hope to meet German Chancellor Angela Merkel. The bus returns to Paris on July 14th, the first anniversary of the Nice truck attack.
The severe weather moving in tonight just as we start the weekend. Already millions in the path of deadly storms from Kentucky to Pennsylvania. Wind gusts nearly 90 miles per hour blamed for killing a 72-year-old homeowner, knocking a large tree right onto his house in Grand Haven, Michigan. Flash flooding washing away streets and submerging cars in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Here's ABC's Gio Benitez now.
Tonight, powerful storms racing east. Intense rain snarling New York's morning commute. Roadways flooded from New Jersey to Massachusetts. Some shut down. This is a major street here in New York City going right through Central Park, but today nothing is going through here. Subway stations turned into waterfalls. This after more than 200 severe weather reports in the last 24 hours. Powerful winds slamming the Great Lakes region as the squall line moved through.
It sounded like a jet engine. A jet plane was just parked on my deck. It was so loud.
Gusts above 90 miles per hour in parts of West Michigan. A security camera catching a flying trampoline landing on a car. In Grand Haven, a 72-year-old man killed when a tree crashed onto a home. Those storms knocking out power for 140,000. And David, those storms brought torrential rain to New York City, falling at over an inch an hour, and they're firing up again from Pennsylvania to Kentucky. It's going to be a rough night, David.
They are moving through quickly, Gio. Thank you. Let's get right to meteorologist Rob Marciano. He's live along New York's West Side Highway tonight for us, tracking these storms. Hey, Rob.
Hi, David. Finally in a dry slot here in New York, but it's not going to last long. And that heavy rain across eastern New England is out to sea. Over 4.5 inches of rain in less than 2 hours through Cape Cod. Incredible. The storms tonight, though, they're in through Cincinnati and through Dayton, Ohio. Indianapolis has been getting hammered. Those watches are up until 11 o'clock tonight. They should weaken after midnight tomorrow. By tomorrow morning, just some leftover storms across the east. Out west, that heat continues. More advisories and warnings out, just building. We had records today across Las Vegas, Phoenix, and Palm Springs. 122. Incredible. We'll see more of those numbers with more records falling tomorrow.
CNN has reported that at least 15 people were killed and hundreds are still stranded after heavy rains triggered floods and landslides this week in southwest Japan. 12 people died in Fukuoka and 14 people are missing, according to Fukuoka Prefecture's disaster management website. It said 104,746 people remain under evacuation orders. 3 people have been killed and 47 people are unaccounted for in Oita Prefecture, where 40,033 people remain under evacuation orders. More than 7,800 rescuers from the Fukuoka Police Force and Japan's Self-Defense Forces have been working around the clock to search for missing people. But heavy rain Friday hampered their efforts, making rescue operations treacherous as they battled against thick mud and debris.
She may not be the bride, but this 92-year-old stole the show at this wedding. Perfectly poised grandma tossed petals down the aisle like a pro. Since she was the flower girl in the ceremony, of course, even her walker was decorated in true wedding fashion. Grams was thrilled to have this special role. It's the first time in more than 70 years she's been in a wedding. She says the last one was her own. So when the bride asked her to perform the honor, she quickly replied, "I do."